Welcome to Empowered Transformation with your host, Christa Dawson. Over the next hour, you will learn about tools that will support your healing process and living a life full of purpose and joy. Now, here is Christa.
Hello, and thank you for joining me in episode 2 of Empowered Transformation. And I am your host, Christa Dawson. Before introducing today's guest, I'd like to take a moment to get intentional. It is my hope that this next hour you learn something new, that you add a valuable tool to your arsenal, and that you leave this hour feeling hopeful, centered, rejuvenated, and most importantly, more compassionate toward yourself. So pause with me for just a moment. Straighten your spine. Rest your tongue on the floor of your mouth. Put a gentle smile on your face. Place your hand over your heart center. And breathe in this intention with me through your nose. And exhale slowly out your mouth. Arrive. Welcome. Here we are. So before I introduce my guest, I want to take a few moments to tell you a little bit about her, and I'm really excited for this show. Excited for the things that I'm going to learn about her. We've been soulmates since we were in 4th grade, and it's been a wild ride, an amazing journey, and we have made our way back to each other in a variety of different ways here later in life. And I'm just so excited to have her and her wisdom on this show. And I'm excited for what we'll learn about her journey today, and hearing from her very trained perspective. We'll learn about trauma as well. So Tabatha is a duly licensed marriage and family therapist and professional counselor in the state of Oregon. She is certified through the Association of Comprehensive Energy Psychology and has been since 2009. She is a clinical fellow of the American Association for Marriage and Family and served as president-elect and president for the Oregon chapter and lobbied Congress regarding mental health benefits and rights. She is a peer-reviewed published researcher regarding the treatment and transmission of complex trauma. She is the co-founder and host of the CPTSD podcast, and she provides clinical and spiritual services in her private practice, specializing in complex trauma, energy psychology, human development, and potential. So I am so proud to introduce you to my very dear friend, Tabatha Bird Weaver. Welcome, Tabatha.
Thank you, Christa. It's an honor to be here. And I got a little teary hearing the word soulmate there, but I think you nailed it.
Yes. So today we're going to take a dive with Tabatha in remembering her experience with healing. This process that unfolds over time. And quite frequently, there are many layers to this process. And so we're going to hear about some of these layers and that lead up to where she is now. And then in our second segment, we are going to be breaking out and rolling out trauma. So Tabatha will be sharing from her personal experience earlier and then in the first segment. So without wasting any more time, let's start to roll out a bit of your story and your story of recovery from complex trauma.
Yes, and let's start with the amazing list of accomplishments that you just read that I've done. Every time I hear that, I think, man, that's fancy. you know, but what I want, the reason I'm starting there is to let your guests know that most of those accomplishments, I did them because of trauma. And I was traumatized while I was doing that. So if you are somebody who is a high achiever, but never satisfied, you might be similar to me. All of those accomplishments came because I was trying to heal and fill a gap inside of myself that was empty. And I thought the next thing would make it better. Right. And if I finally got my master's degree, then I would be acceptable. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that a lot of the things you're talking about were sourced from pain and suffering. I do not regret the experience. I'm proud of what I've done. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had. I also might not have been so stressed if I wasn't always chasing approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really does. All the coping mechanisms that we adopt and develop along the way to protect us from pain, or attempts to protect us from pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they can run a lifetime without us even knowing. I didn't know. That's why I was doing that. And I was, even in the process of getting a degree in human development and marriage and family therapy, I didn't recognize the depths of that. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of trauma pieces before we move into my story. And I know you're going to agree, Christa, because we've talked about these. So one thing is trauma is subjective. That means when you're hearing my story or anybody else's story or thinking about your own, we may have had the same exact experiences with very different outcomes. And this happens in families too, right? So when you hear about how bad or not so bad things have been, comparing yourself to that is not helpful. So just live in your own story. The other thing I wanted to say is that before I found energy psychology, and I'm so excited to talk with you about that today, I graduated from traditional therapy 3 times, never with a correct diagnosis and never actually in recovery. And so I'd like to talk about that along the way too. Where would you like us to start with the story, Christa?
Wow. I want to start where it feels the most useful for you in terms of giving us some sort of background. And, we all have sort of like beginning stories. And again, there are so many layers to the unfolding. And I love that you shared your notes with me. And so, yeah.
We can start at the beginning.
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay.
I think you should.
So my intent here is not to drag my family through the mud. They disagree with everything I'm going to say in the next hour. But what I would like to say is that my household was filled with distress. And that distress was both between my parents as well as between me and my dad in particular. And so I came up with a highly critical household. There's a thing called adverse childhood experiences, and I'd encourage your listeners to go check that out when we're done. We might talk about it more today, but there's 10 that are listed, and I have 8 adverse childhood experiences. That's a lot. So we're talking about abuse and neglect of myself, as well as witnessing a lot of verbal violence in my household and rage fits. Which I believe come from undiagnosed and untreated mental health issues, right? So it's really easy to want to blame, but that doesn't work out. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Can I have you elaborate a little bit more on neglect?
Yes.
People frequently interpret neglect as literally being abandoned physically, but I think that we need to understand that that goes much deeper than that. Can you elaborate on that?
I sure can. So absolutely, neglect is not meeting your needs, where a caregiver is responsible to do that, whether it's a parent, a family member, or even the state, if you're in foster care, for example. Neglect means that the needs go unmet. And so you're right. We do think about food, clothing, shelter, somebody being around to make sure you're safe. Absolutely. The neglect I had was more about, and lots of people in Gen X actually experienced this, maybe some millennials too.
Mhm.
We were latchkey kids. And what that meant was we took care of ourselves. So just our whole generation had that, right? But on top of that, for me, the two things that were really difficult with neglect were the emotional neglect and abuse that went together. So what that looks like is being left alone to deal with your emotions before you're even old enough to know what you're feeling or why. Or maybe verbal violence, like stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. I heard that one, right? And then also just there's an element of, and this is probably more abusive, but blame that can happen when we have immature parents. They make us responsible for their responsibilities. And so we end up getting neglected kind of in a generalized way because nobody's stepping up that is the adult. Oh,
Thank you.
yes, you're welcome. So signs of my experience were obvious, and this is hindsight, but they were obvious. So here are some things to look for in kids if you just notice your kids, the kids around you, because a lot of people could have helped me, but maybe didn't know how to or that there was a problem. So one thing that happens is that we get a lot of physical illnesses. I had earaches from ever. I can't remember a time I didn't. And then I finally had my tonsils out, which helped the earaches, but it didn't help my immune system. And I had eczema. By the time I hit high school, I was being checked for ulcers. And my senior year of high school, I got mono. Darn it, from a spoon too, not even from something that, we call it the kissing disease. So it wasn't even fun.
Right.
Don't share yogurt at school, kids. But my immune system was already trashed from the stress that I had ongoing in my family. And so when I caught mono, it never left. And I now am diagnosed with something called Epstein-Barr virus, and it recurs when I get distressed. So my point here is that there are long-term consequences physically if we are harmed or not supported in our childhood.
And we have a requirement, a neurological and biological requirement for nurture and care. And when that's not met, the consequences are long and hard.
They sure are.
Yeah.
Safety is a requirement for our neurology.
Right.
And so this is a good time to pop in and say, if you've suffered from developmental trauma, which is what we're talking about, it happens in your developmental time frame. So elementary school, junior high, high school, those times, there is a lot of correlation between that and long-term disease. We're talking about cardiovascular disease, diabetes. These are real things. It's not made up in your head, right? So watch out for that. For me, it was my immune system. And fortunately, I met one of my mentors during that time. My mom, gratefully, I'm grateful. My mom was kind of a flower child. And so she didn't want to be putting medication into us, my brother and I, all the time. So I went to an herbalist to see what I could do and learned about muscle testing there, which we can talk about whenever you want. But she was the first person that actually started teaching me about how to get in touch with myself. So grateful there. I graduated from my first counseling arrangement, which my parents set up for me when I was 12. And the way I graduated from that was, first of all, I hated the guy. He was I don't think he was a nice person. Other people may disagree with me. I mean, it is a 12-year-old's perspective, but I finally realized through all of the sessions that I was never going to be heard, and that the goal of this was to make me the family problem, which I am to this day.
Oh, wow.
And so I got to graduate from counseling when I was shamed enough and humbled enough to admit that I was a sinner and creating a lot of distress for my parents. So that's one graduation we've got covered.
Wow. Wow. Yes. Wow. Very personal stories, and thank you for being courageous and sharing them.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, wow. So we have a few graduations I see here.
Yeah.
um,
I think one
so
thing I want to pop in
mhm,
here is that on the outside, my family knew how to make everything look right.
mm,
And I learned that skill, which is how I got through all those accomplishments while, being fatigued and sick. Um, so I was a kid who got a car for my 16th birthday. And that is not a sign that you are not being abused or neglected. So just
mhm,
because your parents met all of your literal physical needs does not mean they cared for you.
mm. Yeah, and I feel like again we want to assume that trauma from neglect or abuse is like this intentional thing that our parents are doing to hurt us. And quite frequently, they're doing things outside of their own. They're not aware of what they're doing. It doesn't make it any less painful or destructive.
Yeah.
But, and I think because most people don't realize, and let's go back to those developmental ages. Parents, and if I knew this, I wish that I had known this.
Mm.
Um, the imperative and important, you are such an integral part of that baby and that child's perception of themselves and their development, right down to a baby absolutely requiring that nurture
Mm-hmm.
to regulate themselves. They don't know how to do it. And it just keeps going on as we get older and we are in those very delicate periods of downloading information that's creating our subconscious beliefs about ourselves in that first 7 years of our lives.
Yeah, we're programming all our core beliefs.
Yeah,
At least the really deep ones at that
right,
time.
right. And a lot of times we don't take into consideration the effects of, or parents don't take into consideration the effects of their actions
Absolutely. And
affecting that.
I'm here to let you know that if you have developmental trauma that is repetitive, meaning it was always that way, it was the way your household functioned, your brain has been damaged.
Yes, there we
Mm-hmm.
are.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great place to pause. There's a lot more to come. We are going to continue to unpack this idea further and understand better the origins of trauma and how it affects your body, your mind, your life, and how you carry trauma into your life. So we're going to take a break. We will be back in just a few minutes.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
Are you tired of feeling stuck? Are you suffering from a chronic illness, addiction issues, lack of motivation, a negative mindset, and a lack of purpose? Do you dream of a life full of purpose and the ability to respond rather than react? And what if you could see yourself through the eyes of compassion while you're in the process of creating the life of your dreams? It will be a process. Dreammakers is designed to empower transformation from being stuck and unsatisfied to a life that is moving forward with purpose and joy. You will get clear on your dreams and the limiting subconscious beliefs that block you from seeing them through. You will learn and be supported in implementing tools that develop the mind-body connection and rewire your brain for success and mastery. Dreammakers is a 12-week online course with weekly live Zoom meetings, a book and workbook, access to accountability, and group support. Spots are limited. Experts say that if a person could do one thing to increase health and happiness, expressing gratitude would be it. Gratitude is an easy, attainable way to improve your outlook and begin rewiring your brain for resilience. You will learn the clinically proven benefits of a gratitude practice, why and how gratitude works to rewire your brain for resilience, and most importantly, a simple but powerful way to amplify your gratitude practice that will benefit your mind and body while improving your outlook.
It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You're listening to Empowered Transformation with Christa Dawson. If you have questions or want to contact Christa, go to christadawson.com. Now, back to the show.
And we're back. So we heard a bit about Tabatha's story, setting the stage so you understand a little bit more the effects or how, what can cause trauma, how in her own personal experience in recovering from complex trauma. And we heard about her first graduation from therapy. And now we're going to hear about the second and third graduations from therapy in hopes to expose a pattern that she feels is important that you understand. So take it away, Tabatha.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christa. The pattern that I'm wanting to communicate here is that a lot of us, especially with developmental or complex trauma, look outside of ourselves for the support, the accolades, the nurturing that we were talking about before. And when you're in a system that doesn't provide that, and just FYI, systems can be state and local governments, our federal government, which the United States does not support nurturing in general, just, our system. When we don't have that mirrored back to us when we're kids, right? And so we don't understand that we're separate beings from our caregivers. We don't understand that our emotions are innate to us. We end up basically trying to chase something to make us feel whole or secure or that inner balance that we're looking for. And because my praise was always product driven, meaning if I got an A, I was good. If I got an A minus, not so much. That much difference mattered. If I did things the way my parents wanted, everything was fine. If not, I'm a problem. That is a very common pattern with developmental trauma. So another common pattern is getting the heck out of Dodge. I realized when I was about 22, I can't live by my family. My dad in particular, I can't live by him. So I moved 500 miles away and started the whole external seeking a validation process again. And I went from taking a community college class at Butte College, Christa, on Hinduism and realizing, oh my God, if I became a Hindu, my dad would hit the roof because we were evangelical Christians, right? So I did that and then realized I am going to eat beef. So that is not a real calling for me, but it was a fantastic introduction into a system outside of Christianity that I could start to evaluate myself. So, and it was the beginning of my lifelong love of the chakra system. So I went from astrology and Hinduism and all of these ways to push back against my parents. And it snapped back and it wasn't satisfying. It didn't fill the hole. So I flipped it, did a 180, moved 500 miles away and enrolled in Bible college. Yes, I did, everybody. Bible college. So that didn't last long. And I got remarkably depressed when that happened for a lot of different reasons. But it was really hard for me to move. It was an energy issue, right? So I wasn't suicidal or anything like that. Sometimes I felt like it would be better if this just stopped, which is a scary way to think. And lots of us think that way. But I was referred to a therapist because the dean of women at that Bible college noticed I was wearing dark colors and thought I was depressed, that was not a good call. I was depressed, but not because I'm wearing black. I'm a winter. But that second wave, I graduated in 6 sessions because I realized what the therapist wanted me to say. And I wanted the therapist to say I was okay. And that equals graduation. That's a success, right? So there's an insight. I realized that they wanted me to show more motivation. So I got a hobby. And also wanted me to recognize that, my dad's anger could have hurt me. So I said that and I got my second graduation. And I'm really not trying to slam therapists here. I am one. But I think we didn't know what to look for like we do now, right?
Mhm.
So I was told by that therapist that I was well adjusted.
Mhm.
So,
Wow.
right?
Which, and this may be not a question for this, but if we do get to it, it would be great. I
Mm,
felt compelled to ask, what or how is our understanding of trauma changed?
that's a great
And
question. And let's just
yeah,
go into it,
okay.
because my story is really just a reference point to understand how we
Mhm.
get here. Our understanding of trauma has changed for several different reasons. First of all, we have MRI machines now and
Mm.
PET scans and CT scans, and there's a whole bunch of ways to get imagery of our brain and our nervous system and what's happening when we're triggered in fight or fight that we didn't have before. So
Right.
that's one thing. A very groundbreaking and large study done by Kaiser Permanente, which was then coupled with the Center for Disease Control, studied adverse experiences in children. And that has also been a remarkable change in the way we treat trauma, because that study proved that psychosomatic is not a real thing the way we used to think of. Yes, all diseases are psychosomatic. It doesn't mean you're making it up. And that's the way that word used to be treated, right? But
Mhm. So
we've
define psychosomatic for me.
psychosomatic means something happens in your mind and then it comes out in your body.
Okay, got it.
And I would say the reverse of that could be true
Psychosomatic.
too,
Okay.
right? Something happens in
Okay.
your body and then it comes out in
Right.
your mind. And
Right.
so that used to be a nice way of saying she's making it up or they're making it up,
Mm,
right? And it's not real. Come to find out it's very real. It's
mm,
very real. And so we understand how our nervous system works differently. We understand
mhm.
how our amino acids work differently. And that has made treating trauma more inclusive, right? Where
Okay,
you
elaborate
don't,
on that.
you bet,
Inclusive how?
you don't have to go to war to have trauma.
Okay,
You don't have
all
to
right.
have been on site at 9/11 to have trauma. You
Okay,
don't have to have a horrific childhood that we see on TV to have trauma,
right.
right? It
Love it.
also, and you're going to like this one, Krista, it also helped us understand how to treat it differently. So we know how to
Mhm,
identify it differently and how to treat it differently.
mhm,
And the nervous system plays a much larger role in treating trauma than it used to, even just a
mhm,
decade ago, which is fantastic.
mhm.
Um, and the ultimate goal is for us to understand that what happened isn't happening now
Mm, mhm.
and what meaning we've made out of it.
Love it. So what you're telling me is that what has changed in our understanding of trauma and the treatment of trauma is through our ability to image what's going on in the body and understand more completely what's going on in the body and in the brain and with our hormones, that we're understanding the very profound link of mind body, of the effects of lack of nurture or verbal abuse or stress or worry.
Mhm.
And it's made the treatment more effective, and it's broadened our scope of understanding, that it is
Yes.
not just relegated to people that have had trauma with a capital T. So,
Yes.
right.
And I think we're going to continue. This is speculation. All right. But I think we're
Mm,
going to continue to learn that our DSM, which is what it's the Diagnostical Statistical Manual, and it's what
mhm,
makes diagnosing possible in the United States.
mhm.
I think we're going to find a whole bunch of things in there that we're going to tie back to neurodivergence. And that's where we're at the forefront of therapy
Define
now.
neurodivergence.
You betcha. So neurodivergence is when your neurology does not work the same way as average.
Okay.
All right. And so examples of neurodivergence would be a very obvious one would be autism,
Okay.
ADHD is one, but also complex trauma.
Okay.
Because when we're being raised in an environment that's not safe, we end up our neurology gets geared to find unsafety everywhere, even when it's
Yes.
not true. Even when it's not
Yes.
true.
Okay.
It feels
Beautiful.
true though. So I mean, don't be dismissive. It feels true.
Right. And I'm
Right?
not saying beautiful because I think it's good. This is what we need to hear and
Yeah.
understand. Yeah, love that. So this is a really good place to explain in a little more detail. Trauma with a big T, trauma with a small t, PTSD, CPTSD. Explain a little further for us.
Okay. So I think one thing you and I have talked about that's a great place to start is that trauma isn't the event. The event is the incident. And if you have multiple events, there's multiple incidents, right? Trauma is the way our nervous system engages with that experience and then stores it, right? And so what we found is
It's the
that
wound.
it's the wound, and we have found immediate treatment post-traumatic type events or post-scary incidents is really important to help regulate the nervous system physically. But we've also found that who is around is important, right? And so just imagine you're a kid and you fall off your bike and you've got gravel in your knee. It's a good skin up, and you run inside and somebody says, "Oh my gosh, let me hug you. Let me clean that. Here's a snack. Have some water. I love you." That must have been scary. All of that empathy and care versus, "I told you not to ride on the gravel road." Now you've got somebody who's left alone and feeling ashamed that they were hurt. That's messy, Christa.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Ouch. Beautiful description.
Okay.
Yeah.
So big T trauma, do you want me to go on?
Yes, please
All right.
do.
All right. Big T trauma would be events that pretty much anybody would recognize as terrifying. War. I think poverty is a big T trauma. Some people don't agree, but I think that. Car accidents would be a big T trauma. And then there's little T trauma, which is the ins and outs of daily life that are hard. And I'm not minimizing there at all. I mean, really hard. For example, what I just said, having no love and affection when you've been harmed is a little T trauma, but it's still a big trauma, if that makes sense. It's a big problem.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Because you're encoding or you're hearing something about yourself.
Right. And then we have like little micro traumas. And again, that's not to be dismissive that they hurt. It's hard to scale things when it's subjective,
Right.
I think that a micro trauma would be any time that you have been hurt by something somebody said or something that happened where they may not have meant that, but it still hurt you. Right. So now I just want to be really clear that microaggressions that happen against people in minorities of any sort, including neurodivergence, right? That is at least a little T trauma. That's not a micro trauma because that's how the system works. And if you have had that repeated, you can have complex trauma, for example, from racism. Okay.
What about, so let's say a person has a habit of speaking very negatively to themselves or revisiting statements being made by somebody that was hurtful or harmful. Is that a form of re-traumatization?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And it's a real stinker too, because your nervous system, once you've had trauma, your nervous system will do what it's designed to do, which is keep scanning for threat. And we will find threats even where they don't exist if we're scanning all the time. All right. That's not to minimize that some people are unsafe. But sometimes, here's a great example. It's a little silly. So my partner and I had a conversation at one point where I realized that when he would raise his eyebrow in a certain way, I'd be like, "F you, man. I'm out of here. I'm not talking. That's it." It was a huge trigger for me. And I'm like, what is going on? Because this person cares for me very much. And so I realized that I was perceiving that as judgment because I had gotten that eyebrow from other people in my life who had harmed me. And so I had to work on my own perception of that because it's normal to raise your eyebrows, right? But I wanted to give you an example of what's nurturing, extra nurturing. I did work on my own perception of that, but my partner also, when we started getting heated, would hold his eyebrow down so that it wouldn't go up. And that is love.
I love that.
Right?
That is so great.
We can re-traumatize ourselves.
Yes. Yes, yes.
And it's hard to not judge ourselves for doing that when we're already in a negative mindset.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. You had mentioned as we were preparing for our talk here today that something I think is really important, and I don't want to miss the opportunity. Can you elaborate a little further on what people need to be looking for from a therapist in terms of, and I forget the terms that you used, but when you had realized that you were more trauma informed for your, that was it. First of all, explaining trauma informed therapy and what a person needs to look for to get good treatment.
You bet. So I'm going to be a stinker like we talked about and say, first off, I really am experiencing trauma informed as a buzzword these days, because what I'm seeing where a lot of places say they're trauma informed and I don't see that and their clients don't experience that. So my point is, just because something says it's trauma informed does not mean it is. And we're also moving to a different model of trauma engaged care. And so what the difference is trauma-informed care. Originally, it was a really great idea, and it was important for us to implement that. What that meant was that we are aware that a lot of people's behaviors and even medical outcomes are related to trauma. And so we think about that when we're assessing you or diagnosing you or providing treatment, right? And so if somebody comes in having rage attacks, they may not be bipolar. It may be trauma. Right? That's just a very simple example where it's bipolar is one of the things that is really overdiagnosed when it's actually a traumatic response, a response to trauma. So trauma engaged care would be, it might almost seem like overkill for some people, but I'll tell you what, if you are traumatized, it's not, it's important. When I do a trauma engaged care, I ask permission and consent for every single step on the way. And I say, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Does this feel like a safe time to talk about whatever the topic is? And if they say no, I don't convince them to talk to me about it then. We move on to the next topic. Now, eventually we might have to come back around to whatever we were talking about, but it's really, really important to be able to do that while not re-engaging that stress response or the fight or flight. And anybody who's gone to the doctor or therapist and not been heard, you know what it feels like to re-engage.
Right. I love that. So a very gentle approach, and giving and returning the power to the person.
Yes. The key is consent every time.
Right. Always, which there is a criteria, I believe 4 or 5 things that cause or we use to define trauma, which we may or may not get to in the next segment. We're going to take a break here soon. In our next segment, we're going to be hearing from Tabatha about the tools that actually did work in helping her recover from her complex trauma. So thank you for being with us up to this point, and we will be right back.
Follow us on Twitter at VoiceAmericaTRN. Get the lowdown on guests, new shows, and your favorites. That's VoiceAmericaTRN. Experts say that if a person could do one thing to increase health and happiness, expressing gratitude would be it. Gratitude is an easy, attainable way to improve your outlook and begin rewiring your brain for resilience. You will learn the clinically proven benefits of a gratitude practice, why and how gratitude works to rewire your brain for resilience, and most importantly, a simple but powerful way to amplify your gratitude practice that will benefit your mind and body while improving your outlook. Are you tired of feeling stuck? Are you suffering from a chronic illness, addiction issues, lack of motivation, a negative mindset, and a lack of purpose? Do you dream of a life full of purpose and the ability to respond rather than react? And what if you could see yourself through the eyes of compassion while you're in the process of creating the life of your dreams? It will be a process. Dreammakers is designed to empower transformation from being stuck and unsatisfied to a life that is moving forward with purpose and joy. You will get clear on your dreams and the limiting subconscious beliefs that block you from seeing them through. You will learn and be supported in implementing tools that develop the mind-body connection and rewire your brain for success and mastery. Dream Makers is a 12-week online course with weekly live Zoom meetings, a book and workbook, access to accountability, and group support. Spots are limited.
It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You're listening to Empowered Transformation with Christa Dawson. If you have questions or want to contact Christa, go to christadawson.com. Now, back to the show.
And we're back. So we just unpacked trauma a bit, and we've talked about over the course of the show some therapies and treatments that didn't work very well for Tabatha. And now she's going to share some modalities and what shifted for her in her practice, not only for herself, but how she works with her clients. So tell us about that transition, Tabatha. What did that look like?
Well, I could laugh about it now, Christa, but at the time it wasn't so fun. I just want to let you know that after that second release from therapy, I ended up graduating with a master's degree, top of my class. I won that outstanding student award, which was a surprise, and I'm proud of that, but I didn't expect it, and it wasn't a goal. I was just trying to survive because I was also working 60 hours a week doing as an HR manager in a software company. And so I was overextending myself repeatedly. And that's one of the things I really want to communicate to people who might have complex developmental trauma, is that a lot of us overextend. And so I can't tell you what worked without telling you my holy guacamole story. I'll try and make it brief. I had a really fantastic friend group during this time, and I'm in my mid-20s that we're talking about right now. They loved me a lot. We had fun a lot. I was planning a party where I invited people over. They were going to just come over, eat food, hang out, whatever. And in my mind, I had created what the perfect table would look like. I've got the snacks over here, the drinks over there, and this wonderful guacamole that was in a beautiful bowl. And I wanted an exact spoon to go into that dip. And do you know, I couldn't find that spoon? And literally, I had the party, just want to reassure everybody, but I was on the verge of turning off all my lights, locking the door, hiding under the table, lying to my friends and being like, oh, sorry, that's next week. Sorry, I missed you, because I couldn't find a spoon.
Oh, wow.
That gave me so much anxiety about not being perfect, the spoon. And that's when I realized, I think maybe therapy didn't work. And
wow.
My reaction to the spoon was too much. So I found a different therapist, and I screened for my therapist this time. And I think that's really important. If you're looking for somebody to help you, whether it's a coach or a therapist or another helping professional, please talk to at least 3 people that do the same thing, because the number one thing you will want in that provider is attunement. And if they can't tune into you, they won't be able to take you as far as you could go.
Love that advice. Yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
So I found a therapist, and I walked in the first session. I didn't know if I was going to go back, because she said, I see you're a floating head. And that was her way of telling me that I was not in my body at all. And she was 1,000% right. 1,000% right. So we did a lot of different techniques to get some information out of me. But the thing that really turned it around was energy psychology. And the day she said to me, can I use you for a guinea pig? This was 1996. And so energy psychology was just becoming a thing. Right. And I said, yes. And the first thing she introduced me to was emotional freedom technique. And then also another modality called healing from the body level up, which was fantastic in my healing.
Sounds juicy.
It's super juicy. And so Judith Swack was the creator of Healing from the Body Level Up. And at that time, Gary Craig was the person who was running the EFT programs. Being able to use body-based interventions that also joined with my mind and what I was thinking at the same time is absolutely the thing that changed my course. And I don't mean to be dramatic, but I'm pretty sure I would be dead by now if I did not get that intervention, probably from something like a heart attack, right? Because I would have continued to overstress my body.
Wow. Yeah, the levels to which we can we push ourselves when we're desperately trying to create external affirmation, when really where we need it most of all is from the inside. And the tools through energy psychology or yoga or breath work, to really invite you back into the body to learn how to regulate the nervous system is so huge in inviting you out of that never-ending hamster wheel of seeking outside of yourself for approval.
Yeah.
Painful place to be, and will make you sick every time.
Absolutely. And just so you know, the approval will never come. And if it does, it won't be enough.
Right.
It just won't, because you're working from a deficit.
Right. Yep.
So
yes. And yes. So how does a person access that internal sense of approval?
That's a rough one. And it may take, especially with complex trauma that starts in childhood, right? Now, or any kind of complex childhood, but that developmental trauma is really tough because we didn't know any better to discern the information we were getting about how the world works, right? And so, for example, one of the core beliefs I had to work on was, if I make a mistake, nobody will love me, right? Or I won't be acceptable. And so the only way to come into that deeper healing that you're talking about is to, first of all, become aware of what's going on inside of you, which is painful. There are painful steps along the way. And the second thing is to start having self-compassion, which seems impossible. And so my point in saying those two really kind of negative things is you deserve support. Get the support you deserve. And if you can find a community that loves you and will start supporting you, get into it. Our healing always happens in relationship. Now, we can have insights on our own, we can do study on our own, but the healing part, in my experience, happens in relationship because that's where the damage occurred.
And so elaborate more on, for yourself and in your practice. So energy psychology tools then became a very integral part of your own personal experience. And then you obviously are using it in your practice. And I want to use this last segment here to really showcase how energy psychology helped you, and what modalities have you fallen in love with? Because there are others, outside of EFT, which is probably the most common. But you have your own modalities that you really have anchored into and love using. And I'd love to hear more about those.
You bet. So just in general, any energy psychology that you use, and you can find a list on the ACEP website, which is energypsych.org. They are going to combine somatic processing with core belief processing and adjustment. And so the energy modalities that I have fallen in love with are advanced integrative therapy, as well as I do love EFT because it's really clear and really deep work. Another energy psychology, or it's not really an energy psychology, but it's a healing modality that I adore, Christa, is called chakra dance. And so both advanced integrative therapy and chakra dance use the chakra system to help us get into our body, feel the feels, recognize the sensations and the emotions, and then move it out. And they do that in a couple different ways. With chakra dance, you're dancing, right? You're literally moving your body however feels right to you. And we've got people who will just stay right there in that center section, step side by side, and people who take up the whole room. So it really is your own expression that's important. And that dance is supported through frequency-oriented music. And so the music fits each chakra that we're trying to stimulate and balance. AIT works with the chakra system by, and this is what I would love to give to your listeners today, is the idea of a chakra bridge. AIT works by bringing up, similar to EFT, bringing up an issue that you want to work on. You think about how you think about that and how you'd rather think about that, right? Like what's the problem? And then we do a series of chakra bridges down the body with a specific statement that we create per individual, per issue. So it's very, very tailored to the specific person at the time. And people can feel the charge moving out of their body. This is what I wrote my paper on. And watching that particular client writhe, just let themselves writhe on the floor and release the stored energy. I mean, they were going so much. I had to say, "Are you okay? Are you having a medical emergency?" Because, of course, this was on telehealth, right? I had their address and phone number down to call 911 if needed, but are you okay? And they said, "I'm so good. I'm kicking this crap off of me." And yeah, so.
Right. Oh, man. So we need to start gearing towards landing our plane.
You got it.
Some things I want to make sure that people are taking away from this is that if you have behaviors happening in your life, if you're struggling with addiction, if you're struggling with anger, if you're feeling depressed, if you're having anxiety, if you're having physical issues, know that your subconscious, those habits are coping mechanisms that you have developed to try and cope with pain. And this is not anything you need to be shameful about. And this developing some form of compassion for yourself, developing key compassion. Let's just not say some form. Let's work on developing compassion, knowing that in this moment you are doing the best that you can, and the moment you can do better, you will. Putting yourself in positions and places where you are supported and loved as you work through trauma, finding a therapist that will help you work through that trauma, learning how to make or cultivate the mind-body connection is so key, so important. So Tabatha, where can people find you? So you offer chakra dance via your website or workshops?
I do. Yes.
Right.
If people want to get a hold of me or listen to more information about this, you can do that for free on the CPTSD podcast. It is a podcast available on iTunes and all the other places. You probably would download that. We also have a YouTube channel if you would prefer to see my talking head while we're going over those topics. And we're expanding the CPTSD podcast into the CPTSD network, where we're going to be offering some courses and online circles. Chakra dance is also available. And you can get to any of these things that we're talking about through my website, tabathabirdweaver.com. I do take private clients, but I have an intense workload, meaning I work with a small group of people for a long amount of time. So there's probably a wait list going there right now, but please do head over if you'd like more connection. Nice.
And what about social media platforms?
Yep, I'm all over the place, either my name, Tabatha Bird Weaver, or the CPTSD podcast. I'm more active on TikTok.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything else that you would like to add today to just kind of end cap our discussion? Any bit of advice or encouragement?
I could give 2 hours of advice, but the one thing that I would say, is if you want to start getting in touch with your body, you'll most likely do that with distress, because that's what we notice. We don't always notice when we feel fine, right? So if you feel distress, I'd encourage you to just pause for a minute, locate where that is in your body. And it may be all over the place. And if that's the case, locate where you think the epicenter is, right? And if you can't find it, do whatever feels good. What you're going to do next is take a hand and put it there and just listen to yourself. What do you have to say?
Yeah. I wish we had more time with this. This is so good. I want to thank you all so much for being here. You can find me at christadawson.com. You can find me on Facebook. And I want to just end cap this day today, first of all, by thanking you for being here today. And let's take one more moment, one more opportunity to be really intentional. Straighten your spine, rest your tongue on the floor of your mouth, put a smile on your face, and place your hand over your heart center, and take a moment to thank yourself for being here today, for honoring your process. Feel gratitude in your heart for honoring your process, by being here today. Take a deep breath in and a long, slow exhale. Thank you again for being here. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Empowered Transformation with Christa Dawson. We hope you have gained insight into the healing process and added tools to your tool belt. Until we talk again, have a beautiful week.